I don't think you say that out loud. I think you keep that inside.
And I'm going to get my Japanese wrong on this one.
This is just a bad idea.
I didn't notice any CGI in this movie.
And then, of course, he goes off and gets infected with his alien STD.
Thank God Fergal wasn't here to share what he thought that meant.
He does not say one funny thing.
Hello and welcome to Movie
Hello and welcome to Movie Smash, the podcast where we dive headfirst into comic book movies outside the MCU. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us. If you've been here before, you know the drill. Each episode, we're going to smash through a movie whose source material is a graphic novel or a comic. Are they worth revisiting? Should they be forgotten? Let's find out. This is Movie Smash. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Roberts. I'm the founder of Off Panel Creations, and with me today I have Jeremy Parmentier.
Hi, this is Jeremy Parmentier of the Retrovaniacs podcast and Retrovania.net, and I also have a ring that controls all my powers.
With us today, we have a guest host, Ryan Forbes, from the show The Shakedown.
Hi, I'm Ryan Forbes, host of the Shakedown podcast and also graphic novel writer/artist.
Ryan, it's great to have you. Our movie today is 2011's Green Lantern, starring Ryan Reynolds, Blake Lively, and Peter Sarsgaard, directed by Martin Campbell. And since Jeremy gave me so much grief about it last time, how'd I do on those names?
That was so far pretty good. It's close. Peter Sarsgaard's a tough one. I'll give you credit.
Lanterns, we face an unprecedented danger. An enemy powerful enough to destroy entire civilizations. To fight this enemy, the ring chose a human.
Speak the oath. Speak the oath. Because everybody knows the oath. I pledge allegiance to a lantern that I got from a dying purple alien.
Remember, your enemy is not gonna play fair.
Is that what I think it is?
An alien life form, Doctor. The first that mankind has ever encountered.
So guys, before we jump into the movie today, how familiar are you with the Green Lantern character?
I'm familiar with the character I used to work at a comic store, as I've mentioned many times, so I did read some of the Justice League. I knew of the character, but always as like just a member of the team. I didn't read a lot of his individual comics, so I knew what he could do generally, but I don't know enough about the real core of the character or of the people outside of the costume to tell if this was a great version of it or not, but I was familiar enough to know what the powers were.
I knew of the character because when I was growing up, I watched Super Friends on Cartoon Network, and as soon as I saw his powers, I was like, those are the coolest powers. I want those. I started getting into the comics, and at the time, that's when Kyle Rayner was in the comics, and then I started getting into that story and started learning all about the different Green Lanterns, the core, and getting into the graphic novels. And Green Lantern's really been one of my favorite characters from the comics for a long time. And when this movie came out, I rushed to theaters despite the crazy bad reviews because I love that character so much.
I was slightly familiar with the character Green Lantern. My experience with him was really around the Justice League cartoon and the Justice League Unlimited cartoon. I was more of a Batman, Superman kind of fan. So Ryan, have you seen this movie since that first time? And Jeremy, was this your first watch?
Yeah, that was the only time I saw it because that was very heartbreaking.
See, I saw it on HBO or one of the other, regular pay channels at some point kind of right after it came out. So not immediately, but within a year or so after it came out. I am a fan of Ryan Reynolds. I was beforehand when he was doing mainly comedies and stuff. So I kind of was like, I wonder what he's going to do in this movie. So I was surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did at the time. But it's also one of those movies, and I don't know quite why, but it's almost like I can just put it on in the background. I don't have to pay a lot of attention to it after I've seen it once or twice because you know what's going to happen. And I just leave it on in the background. I've watched it many times just kind of as I was playing a video game or something else that was going on. So I've seen this many times, but never in the theater.
For me, I really don't remember when I saw this. I know I've seen it. I'm not sure if I saw it on a streaming service, DVD, or the theaters. I just have no idea. But I have seen this movie in the past. It's probably a testament to how I feel about this movie, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But Ryan, when it comes to this movie, you chose this for us to review. Why did you choose Green Lantern?
The reason I chose it is because I was listening to this podcast before and it came up. And also because I was such a big fan of Green Lantern, and I really had high hopes, and like I said, I didn't really want to watch this movie again because it broke my heart, but I really was interested in the idea of watching it again at like trying to be impartial and just judging it just on movie style, and really trying to see if it if it was as bad as I remember, or if there was more to it, and if it did actually do the character some justice despite my memories of it.
Ryan, as a fan of the Green Lantern, can you give us a little bit of history for this character?
Sure. So originally, in the comics, there's the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and then the current era. The Golden Age Green Lantern was Alan Stewart. He had like a very different costume and feel and everything like that. And his powers didn't revolve around the color yellow or anything like that. It was just about wood and organic objects, which was kind of weird. And then when they changed over to Silver Age, that's when they introduced Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan, much like this movie describes, there's an alien crash down, dying on the planet, asks his ring to look for the perfect person, and it chooses Hal Jordan, who much in the fashion of DC and Marvel, they were kind of stealing from each other. So Hal Jordan was also a man without fear, just like Daredevil, and was fearless. He was a fighter pilot, and he was, or not really fighter pilot, he was a test pilot, and he became Green Lantern, and he was all the way up into the 90s until the death of Superman arc, where he actually became this huge supervillain, Parallax, which he decided that because his hometown was destroyed, he was going to kill the entire Green Lantern Corps that he worked with for decades up to that point, and then was going to kill them, take their rings, and then remake the universe to his liking. And so the Guardians, who are the ones who handed out the Silver Age rings, they decided to make one ring without the yellow weakness that the Silver Age rings had, and handed it to just some guy who was peeing outside a bar in the middle of the night. And that guy was Kyle Rayner, and who ultimately became my favorite Green Lantern. And then eventually, after DC decided, you know what, Kyle Rayner doesn't really fit our Justice League of Heroes. We need to bring back, that classic Hal Jordan figure, and they brought him back and put him back up in that pantheon of heroes.
I had completely forgotten that the original Green Lantern's weakness was a guy with a big piece of wood.
Yes. Or you could, that one time, they just covered him with fertilizer.
I can't even. Just a quick spoiler warning. If this is your first time joining us, we'll be discussing the plot of this movie and discussing many elements of the story that might be considered spoilers. So consider yourself warned. So, Jeremy, what happens in this movie?
Sure. So this is the movie version of Green Lanterns, the Hal Jordan version of Green Lantern's origin story. Hal is a hotshot fighter pilot. Seems like he just doesn't take anything seriously. Gets by his good looks and charm. So having Ryan Reynolds play him makes a lot of sense. Basically, at the time this came out, I just thought, yep, this is Ryan Reynolds playing Ryan Reynolds in a movie about superheroes. Hal is then selected by like in the origin story that was just mentioned, Hal's selected by this dying alien who's also one of the Green Lantern Corps, crashes on Earth, and then he becomes the next Green Lantern in his place. Hal has to learn how to use the powers of the ring, which are essentially telekinesis, like whatever he imagines the ring can do, like makes it like a green energy field that does stuff in the movie at least. And this, part of his training is being shot through space to their headquarters for a training montage. Parallax, who was just mentioned, is in this movie kind of this overarching force of fear. You find out more about his past in the movie, at least in the DC movie universe. And he's going to come to Earth to destroy the Earth on the way to, take on the Green Lantern Corps, who he feels have wronged him for reasons that are determined in the movie. So Hal has to learn how to use his powers to try and save the Earth and possibly the Green Lantern Corps.
There's been a lot of mixed reviews over the years about the portrayal of Ryan Reynolds on the Green Lantern. How do you feel how he did?
As not being a fan of the comics before, not that I didn't like them, I wasn't a big fan. I was fine with it, but I am very curious how you feel about it since you were such a fan of the Green Lantern character.
Honestly, Ryan Reynolds' portrayal I thought was fine. He did a great job of being Hal Jordan. The issue after rewatching the movie again was really the Hal Jordan character in the movie has no story arc. He starts off as a lone wolf who basically in the very first scene of the movie, he doesn't listen to everyone and then tanks $1 million jet just to prove he can do something that a machine can't. All right. So he goes off and he does that, and he does it all on his own and doesn't listen to everyone. Then it seems like we're going to have this movie where he's going to go and meet the Corps, and then he's going to learn to be have teammates and things like that. And at the end, he kills the bad guy on his own without any help. Actually, he kills two bad guys on his own without any help, proving that he's a lone wolf and can do things on his own. And Ryan Reynolds was funny, charming, charismatic, but the character, there's no story there, I don't feel like.
I am glad you brought that up, because you're right. There is no story arc for the Green Lantern as a character. He's the same person at the beginning of the movie as he is at the end of the movie, just now with some cool green powers. So I got to watch this with my family on Father's Day, and my oldest child, my daughter, she was watching it with us, and she wasn't really happy to be there. But all of a sudden, Ryan Reynolds comes on the screen, and she gets all excited. She thinks this is now a Ryan Reynolds movie, and gets very excited at the fact that he can be very charming. But in this movie, he's actually a very watered down version of himself. And believe me, she was not happy about that.
I agree. I'll tell you. So I was watching with my wife, and she had never seen this movie. She was we were looking at the cast. The cast in this movie is more amazing than I even remember it. There's people like the guy who plays Sinestro. There's Ryan Reynolds' best friend is Taika Waititi. And when we both my wife's favorite movie is Thor Ragnarok. So she was out of her mind when she saw him on the screen. And he does not say one funny thing throughout the course of that entire movie.
Yeah. And it's funny, if he had done more with it, who knows where his career would have gone. I think actually, since he failed as a support character in this movie, he went off back to New Zealand. He did a TV show. What was that show called again?
What we do in the shadows.
You're right. What We Do in Shadows. Thank you. And that gave him sort of enough fame where he can go off and then do Thor Ragnarok. So I think he needed that sort of bad experience with the Green Lantern to give him the opportunity to go do something else more indie, and then eventually go off to do the movie I love, Thor Ragnarok.
But Thor Ragnarok, the way they put that together, combining a bunch of different comic graphic novels, it's great. And it's just kind of amazing how many great actors and characters and stuff were in Green Lantern. And you're kind of everyone's just sitting through this movie is happening to the audience.
Yeah. You're
not enjoying it.
Other than the Green Lantern character, other than Hal, no one does anything in this movie. Everyone's there while things happen to him, but his girlfriend is there just to kind of keep him human, I guess, sort of, but otherwise she doesn't really do anything in this movie. Even the bad guy, the Hector, who becomes kind of like the Earth version of the bad villain, right? Until you find out what the real villain is later on. But the Earth version, he doesn't even do a ton. He's there, but every time he does anything, Hal shows up. There's nothing happens outside of what's going on with Hal. So there's all these other characters in the movie are kind of wasted. They don't do any building with any character, not just Hal, but no one gets an arc except for arguably Hector, but it's the most obvious arc yet.
Speaking of Hector, how do you feel about him as being the villain?
I totally agree. So like what Jeremy was saying, everyone's kind of a cheerleader for Hal. And even Hector seemed like he was going to be one of the more interesting characters throughout the entire movie. He had a backstory about his childhood trauma and why he's a bad guy. And also the way they did Parallax was Parallax infected Hector. He wasn't, at first, it seemed like he wasn't choosing to be a bad guy. And so it kind of built up this story where there was going to be a redemption arc. There was going to be Hector could then, he was going to do all this awful stuff, and then he was going to suddenly realize, just like Hal did when he was infected with Parallax, I want to be the good guy. I'm not acting like myself anymore. And then immediately turn and try and, fight Parallax with Hal, even if it ultimately ended up in the same thing and he died, the same way at the end. Instead, he doesn't. None of that happens, and Hal just kills him, which is way worse.
Hector feels like he's the opposite of Hal, and not in a bad way. What I mean by that is he doesn't want to, ride his father's coattails. He doesn't want to. When his father actually pulls some strings, give him a job, doing the alien autopsy, he gets mad about it. He wants to do this on his own. He wants to, achieve what he can without his father. And then, of course, he goes off and he gets infected with his, alien STD, and fear starts to take over for the kid.
you're supposed to, I think, feel sorry for Hector. Like you mentioned, you have his backstory. You see why he becomes evil to some level, the infestation, but also just why he might decide to then use that to get even with people, right? But it doesn't come across well. It doesn't make you feel sad for him at any point. You're not like, oh man, that sucks for Hector. He tried so hard and yet this happened. Instead, it's just like he acts like a spoiled kid almost immediately. As soon as he's infected, he just does all this stuff that you're like, why? This is the jump from just being kind of upset to just, oh, I'm going to do these, like, I'm going to try to kill my father. I'm going to try to capture this other agent. I'm going to try to, it's like everything he's doing is just so beyond what makes you feel sad for him. So that even if there was kind of a redemption arc, I don't think it would have worked very well. Instead, having what kind of happened is, he's basically, he fails his master and then is eaten, which is fine. I thought it was also a good way to end it. But I thought Hector was going to be more interesting than he was. And instead, just maybe the worst character in the movie. I think the makeup on him is not great. He looks like he has balls for a face. And he also just, in general, the scream he makes for no reason. Like, why is he doing that? It was just like, it was so over the top that it made it so there was almost no humanity left in him. And I don't think that was on intention.
And I will tell you another thing about Hector. Pretty much every character in this movie, I could tell you at least a little bit of their backstory on. I had to, while watching this movie, look up and find out who the heck Hector Hammond is and why. I was like, he must be some sort of character with some sort of relevance to be one of the main characters. And because they're doing all this grotesque makeup on him, that must be some sort of meaning. But like, of all the Green Lantern stories I've read over the years, I've never seen Hector Hammond. And which should say how much of like a Green Lantern villain he was. And like basically like he's not like, it was a weird choice to even have him in the movie, period.
This movie does a lot of work in creating a lot of background characters, and you can see that because looking back now and knowing that this movie was supposed to be the first of a trilogy, you can see why they were doing that. And there's a ton of them. I mean, you have Dr. Waller, who's Amanda Waller, in charge of the Suicide Squad. You have the Sinestro clip at the end of the movie.
Yeah, that was one thing that my wife and I, as we were watching it, my wife is sitting there, she's like, you can tell that something's up with Sinestro. And Sinestro, in the comics, the story was that he was supposed to be this great hero like Hal, and then he turned, and then he got a yellow ring, and then like became one of the biggest villains to Hal and the Green Lanterns. And so if you're a fan, as soon as you see Sinestro, you know, like you're waiting for Sinestro to do something. And in this movie, and like my wife is looking at it and she's watching it, and she's like, she knows just because of the actor who plays him, who normally plays villains, he normally plays villains, so she's expecting him to do something villainous right off the bat. But he doesn't. But he's also not an ally in this movie either. He just argues with Hal, and not for great reasons. And so he's not really anything. And it's one of those things where he's just supposed to be there to make Hal do things.
Well, I think it comes across as, you know, I don't know why the ring picked you, right? You're not strong enough to be one of our members. And then Hal leaves, kind of proving him right. When he's still seems like he might be a villain early on. Then kind of towards the end, like he kind of seems like he redeems himself until that extra credit scene when you're like, okay. But it wasn't a surprise. Like once that extra post-credit scene came up, I wasn't shocked by any of that. Like you could see it coming the whole time. But I didn't mind Sinestro at all. But you could tell that something was going to happen at some point. So I was kind of surprised when he had kind of the redemption arc towards the end. Even though it was not a very great one, he at least was like, you know what, Hal? You're great. And I was like, all right, that's good. I could take that. But yeah, I wasn't surprised for the post-credit Sinestro heel turn.
I just don't see why he did it. I mean, I understand why they made the ring in the first place, why he was pushing for it, but the big bad is gone. The problem is solved. Why would he put the ring on now? I just don't understand.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense in the world of the movie. It would have made sense if like they didn't have Hammond and he grabbed the ring and then he does the heel turn in the movie. But like,
right.
Yeah, after the threat's gone, unclear.
So, Jeremy, do you think it suffers from the same problem that we discussed before with Superman, where it's laying the groundwork for a second movie, but in this case, a second movie never came?
Not as much, although I think Superman is a better movie than this, but it does have the same, I don't want to say problem, but they lay out, there's clearly a sequel in mind for this, right? Superman, the original cut at least didn't have that much. It was there, but it wasn't obvious at the time, at least not to me. Although again, when I saw Superman, I was a child. But this movie, it feels like the whole time they're setting up for it. There's going to be more of this, right? You've already got the Superman films that have been out at this point. You've got the Dark Knight Returns had come out a couple years before this. So you've got DC movies where you can see where they're trying to build up the universe. So it was just like, okay, well, here's the way to introduce Green Lantern. And there's clearly going to be more going on. And then just it didn't happen. So I don't think it's as... I mean, I think it does lay out that there should be a sequel, but I also don't think it necessarily hurts this movie because of that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like Superman, I felt like you could tell it was a little boring because they were laying out Superman. You had all this stuff to lay out. Also, they hadn't really done good superhero movies before then. That was kind of laying groundwork. This, though, introducing Green Lantern, especially if you're not a comic fan, how do you explain his powers quickly? You really can't. So you have to put a lot of time into the backstory and the Green Lantern Corps, everything else. So I don't think this is as painfully slow as I feel Superman gets to be in some parts. But I also don't think it's nearly as interesting of a story.
Well, and I will say this is one of the issues a lot of people have with Green Lantern. Green Lantern's ring, and like you were trying to describe it, and it's a hard one to grasp. But the thing I latched onto when I was a kid, this guy has a ring, and the ring is a weapon, and the weapon's power is that it can make anything you imagine real to defend yourself with. And I'm like, that was the cool part for me. The reason why no one can define that so easily is that in the comics and in the cartoons and in the movies, the way you see the Green Lanterns use the ring is they'll put a ball around themselves, or they'll make a giant fist, or they'll do, and it's unclear. It's like, what is this green thing that they do? They even, one thing they even do is like, so Miss Marvel right now in the TV series and in the Marvels movies, her power in the comics is like Mr. Fantastic's powers. She can stretch really far, but they didn't want that. So they basically gave her the Green Lantern power.
Yeah. Yep.
But like, you can't really tell what it is because they just, the person using it isn't very creative. The reason I wasn't a huge fan of Hal Jordan and I really liked Kyle Rayner is that Hal Jordan was a fighter pilot. So the things he came up with were fist, baseball bat, baseball glove, and fighter jets. That's it. Like, that was basically his canon, even in cartoons, whatever, throughout the whole thing. Then the person who followed him up was Kyle Rayner. He was a comic book artist. What did he make? He made mech suits and velociraptors and zombie armies. And like, he showed how the ring could actually be used. And then it was like a cool superpower. And that's how you would define it. So like there's one scene in Green Lantern, which to me was my favorite scene, where he makes like a whole racetrack.
Yes. Yep.
And I'm like, that's really what you need to show how the ring works, is like, you just show that he's making a million things at once, but he's just doing it with his mind. And it's not about the fact that it gives him a superhero suit. It's not necessarily that he can fly or that he can go up there. It's that he can just make a whole bunch of cool stuff. And it's whatever he can come up with.
And unfortunately, for the rest of the movie, he just makes fists and jets.
Right, exactly.
And all that you just complained about.
Yes.
Now, in the movie, you see dozens and dozens of Green Lanterns in the background. Now, Ryan, for you being a fan of Green Lantern, were any of these canonical and were any of these significant?
Yeah. So they did do a good job of, I mean, really, for sticking true to the characters, they did a really good job, except for there's one giant exception, and it ties to one of the big flaws of the movie in general. Carol Ferris, who eventually becomes Star Sapphire in the movie. And I guess, so let's go into what happened when after Hal Jordan becomes Parallax, and then they need to take out Parallax, and they decide they want to get rid of Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern. They decided they're just going to retcon the whole story and come up with a whole change what actually happened to Hal. And that's when they came up with the big monster thing, Parallax, that was in the movie. And Parallax also shows up in like the first 10 seconds of the movie. And when I was in the theater and I saw Parallax, I was like, you just went through like 30 years of comic book history, and you're jumping into it in the first 5 minutes of this film. you're biting off. I'm like, why? This is too much information. No one's going to understand, because Parallax is like a fear entity. It ties into the fact that there's not just Green Lanterns, but there's Star Sapphires, which are pink for some reason. And then there's the Indigo Tribe, and there's what Sinestro ultimately becomes, which are the Sinestro Corps, which is the yellow rings. And so there's all these different colors with different attributes and do run off of different emotional spectrums, which is cool. But I'm having trouble trying to summarize it right now. How are you going to fit that in a 90-minute movie? And have that be your main bad guy? But Carol is a Star Sapphire, and she ultimately becomes a Star Sapphire. And she's honestly just she's a really underrated comic book character in general. She can do basically all the things that Hal can do as a Green Lantern when she becomes a Star Sapphire. And she owns the company that Hal's working for. And she, as it showed in the movie for 2 seconds, she's a fighter pilot. And she ends up doing just throughout a lot of the comics, she kind of ends up doing more than Hal, and has her own different troop. But in the movie, they kind of start telling that story of how Carol is doing all this really great stuff. She's the owner and a pilot, and just as much as Hal, if not better. And then Hal gets her a necklace, and then she's just all concerned about Hal, and then she becomes a hostage. And I'm going to kind of go on to I got a whole nother tangent this ties into, sorry. But in comics, there's this problem. It's sometimes called throwing the woman off the bridge, referring to Gwen Stacy, or it's called the woman in the fridge is the more common name. The reason it's called the woman in the fridge is that when they introduced Kyle Rayner, to give him a reason to be a superhero, they took his girlfriend, didn't give her a personality, and chopped her up and threw her in the fridge. And she became his whole motivation to become a superhero. That was her whole point in the story. So they just took a female character that was did not give her a personality, just made her two-dimensional and just threw her out the window, gave her a horrible, horrible death, and did that. So the idea that in a Green Lantern movie, where it's a known problem that they have of showing women this way, that they would take the lead female character, who's a really strong character, and then just make her a hostage, and that's like her main purpose throughout the entire movie, was a bad idea all around. And I'm really underselling that right now.
Well, I wonder if they would have made these other movies, if it was supposed to be a trilogy, if they would have had kind of that turn for that character, right? Have her kind of maybe not become the Star Sapphire, but have, some other thing where she becomes more of a hero than a victim. But yeah, I mean, I can see that.
Honestly, if at the end of the credits, it probably would have been more interesting if she had gotten the Star Sapphire. If the Star Sapphires had recruited her at the end of the credits, that would have made more sense and made it more interesting, I think, than Sinestro getting the yellow ring. And it does all the things of bring in the spectrum and all that kind of stuff that it seemed like they were trying to build in.
Well, and then they could have something happen in the next movie that makes what Sinestro does make sense.
Absolutely.
This movie was actually supposed to be the foundation of a new DCEU. And at the time, Marvel had recently established their universe. And with the Green Lantern movie, which is why they put so much money into it and why there were so many characters jammed into it, was meant to be that foundation step.
And I remember when this movie came out, I was really hoping DC would do that. But the problem is that whenever they do something with Green Lantern, they really want to do it with either Hal Jordan or they want to do it with John Stewart, which is their one key black Green Lantern that they want to use. And but the problem is they don't have great backstories to pull from. I thought it would be great if they did what they did in the comics, what DC did in the comics to build a universe and to really tie everything together, and which was to kill Superman. So instead of having the Batman versus Superman movie, which I was Yeah, I was a sweet summer child because that movie didn't exist at this time, and the first Avengers movie was right around the corner. I was like, if they killed Superman, made a Death of Superman movie, that actually, in that story in the comics, it actually tied all of the other books together, and it introduced a ton of new characters at the same time, and they could go off and go in all of these great directions, and it made for these really interesting stories. And I figured if they made a movie about it, they could make a unique movie. Everyone would go to the movie if they made a Death of Superman movie, and it would be great. And then they made Batman Superman, and I'm sad.
So for the character of Parallax, he's the big bad behind everything, and I don't know much about the source material. So the question I have is his representation on the screen comic book accurate?
Okay, I'm going to ask you this, Jeremy. Let's see if you can get this. How many characters are Parallax in the movie?
I mean, in the movie, I think it's one. Because they explain the backstory in the movie for Parallax, and it sounds like it's one person. Now, I'm sure in the comics it's not, or it's not even maybe a person. Maybe it's an entity. I don't know. But in the movie, the background they gave him, it seems like it's one person's decision has created this monster out of them.
Yeah, and this is where it's so super confusing. Parallax, the thing called Parallax, is not a person. It's like an entity that infects people, and it only really infects one person at a time. So what happens in the movie is what you're seeing actually is a guardian infected with Parallax, and that's the version of it you're seeing. That version isn't really in the comics, so there's not really anything to compare it to. But that's but then it's an interesting concept, sure. But once again, you've gotten a 90-minute movie and you're trying to show this concept. It's a really hard concept to get in the first movie. I remember sitting in the theater and just as soon as it came on screen, I'm like, as soon as he said the word Parallax, I was like, no, bad. This is just a bad idea.
So for me, the representation reminded me of the Fantastic Four movie what was it, the Silver Surfer one, where Galactus is this giant cloud that sort of just flows in.
Well, at the very beginning, you do get to see the kind of the intro with him, which then it does seem like it's got a form. Then when it goes to Earth, it does have that cloud kind of sense. There's a face, but it's it's kind of like the in the Mummy, that thing that's made of the bugs that just becomes like a face. It's the same idea. It's just like this shapeless thing. But then once he goes out to space again towards the end, then there's more of a almost like an octopus kind of feel to it. I don't know. I didn't mind it anywhere but on Earth I was not a fan of how that looked.
In the scene where Parallax is moving through the streets as a giant cloud and devouring people, the director said the inspiration for the scene was 9/11, and I don't know how to feel about that.
I don't think you say that out loud. I think you keep that inside.
I was going to say, no, you don't say that out loud. And one other thing on Parallax, one of the coolest things having a character that can jump from character to character, the coolest part of having a character like that is watching it jump from character to character. Because when it goes into Hal Jordan, he doesn't become like a cloud thingy. He still looks like he's a Green Lantern, but he's a Green Lantern with crazy armor and a devil mask and he's way overpowered all of the sudden. And his hair goes white. That's what Parallax looks like in Hal Jordan. And then there's when it goes into someone else, they look different. And so the fact that there's no, it's just kind of like a force of nature floating through the universe. That's it lost one of the coolest factors of that character. Is when it goes from one thing to another.
Now, in the Japanese release, they changed the name of it from Parallax, and I'm going to get my Japanese wrong on this one.
Oh, boy. Can't wait.
Moso Dairi Nin. How'd that sound, Jeremy?
I don't know even what it's supposed to sound like. So far, so good.
Good. It translates directly to Paranoia Agent, which was also the name of a TV show at the time. So my question is, what's a better name, Parallax or Paranoia Agent?
Parallax works, but that is a better explanation, I think, of the concept that it just does. It ruins other things, right? It takes over a body, or it will corrupt you from inside. That's a better explanation than what this movie explains Parallax is.
technically what it is. It's a paranoia or fear agent. It's something that makes someone fully powered by fear.
Now, we've been really focused on the characters at this point, but are there any scenes that stood out to you guys?
I would say there's the two scenes that really stick out to me. One was the scene with the car, and then where he's making the car and everything. And then the other one is when Taika Waititi basically reads his lines line for line from the trailer.
I liked the Green Lantern planet because, again, I knew enough about the comics to know there were other Green Lanterns, but I thought it was good that they included it. Didn't just make it where this whole movie's on Earth and there's no real reference, or they only show up at the very end. There's enough of it, and I liked seeing the other alien Green Lanterns and they kind of work together as a group. I enjoyed that. Yeah, the rest of it, I don't know, the rest of the movie, aside from if you really like Ryan Reynolds, there's not a lot of other really notable scenes on their own that I was like, oh yeah, I got to remember that. Like, the end is cool, I guess, but it's just a space fight. Superman's had a space fight. It's nothing brand new, I guess, but it was fun to look at. But yeah, I liked the scenes on the Green Lantern, home planet.
My kids really enjoyed the Oath scene where he's trying to figure out what to say, power of Grayskull. The other one was where she says, "I've seen you naked," trying to highlight the fact that she can tell who's behind the mask.
I did like that.
And I really like that because they really are hanging a lantern on the fact that a superhero has this very simple mask on. And obviously, if you know the person for years, you should know who it is.
Right.
Well, and it calls out things like in Superman, how Lois Lane doesn't know who Clark Kent is Superman, even though she's worked with Clark for years, and it's literally the same guy without glasses. It's not even a different haircut. It's the same thing. So I like that they called it out immediately. Yeah, of course I knew it was you. It's ridiculous. So I like that.
How do you guys feel about the pacing for this movie, given it's clocking in just over 2 hours?
It feels like 4.
Yeah, it's got a lot of unnecessarily long scenes, and it does have a lot of explanations because they are trying to do way too much. Introducing this kind of larger-than-life character as the main bad guy by, immediately kicking off the movie with it. You're trying to explain this to people who probably have not read the comics and don't know anything about Green Lantern, and you're throwing in a ton of things. So they're trying to explain it off, but instead it makes it so it's lecturing you, but not in a fun way. It's literally just like a guy reading you. Here's a history of Green Lantern. Here's a history of this character. Here's a history of what's going on. Here's why this is important. It goes on a little too long, and the action scenes that are supposed to kind of balance it out there's not enough of them.
The pacing for this movie is really slow. In fact, I watched the extended version of this movie, and I do question my life decisions on that one. There is so much exposition in this movie. It's just a data dump. My kids were calling out that just because it just keeps going on and going on and going on at the beginning. It's a good solid 5 minutes of just talking about the world they're trying to set up. I have not seen that level of exposition since an 80s movie. It takes so much time to cover. There's just so much ground they need to cover in order to establish this universe.
One of my favorite comic book writers, he did this comic and he was talking about this Japanese game show where the goal of the game show is that when you wake someone up and the winner is the person who can get someone to eat a hot dog the fastest. And he feels like exposition at the beginning of a story is like forcing a hot dog down someone's mouth.
That is a great visual.
Yeah.
Thank God Fergal wasn't here to share what he thought that was. We're good.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking to myself, Fergal would have taken this in a completely different direction. One of the things this movie's often panned about is the CGI. Now, having gone back and rewatched it, how do you guys feel about the effects?
I didn't notice any CGI in this movie. No, this movie is 90%. It's 90% CGI. Everything is CGI. Especially on the other planet, obviously, but just his entire powers, you have to create things out of nothing. They're going to do it with CGI. I don't mind it because it was so much that it was almost like, that movie Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow that was all CGI? It felt like that with some people in it. I didn't have a problem with the amount of CGI, but it's a lot.
It was a lot. I feel like they could have done less and that's saying a lot for a Green Lantern movie because there's going to be a ton of CGI in a Green Lantern movie. Honestly, as far as what they did, for the most part, honestly, that really did not bother me. It really, of all the things that could have taken away from the movie or anything like that, the CGI never really took away from it. Didn't really, wasn't really interfering. It was that was okay.
I think I'm on the same page with you guys in this one. For its time, 2011, they're really aiming high for the level of CGI for this movie. You can really tell by the budget as well. It felt only, there were a couple shots looking at it now saying they were a little bit off, especially when he's flying through the city during daylight. Other than that, the CGI does hold up. It's not amazing, but it's also not as bad as I remember it being. In fact, Ryan Reynolds himself really hated the Green Lantern suit. He just hated the fact it was all CGI. How did you guys feel about the suit itself?
That's one of the things where I'm like, that they put CGI on the suit, which I feel like was unnecessary. I don't feel like that needed like additional CGI work on it, which was, I remember in my first watch of the movie, I picked up on one thing, because there were so many CGI characters for the core, it did make them consistent, which is one of the big things from the comics, is that they had a consistent outfit for weird non-humanoid characters going on throughout.
Yeah, I think because of the amount of CGI in this movie, it made it consistent. I think consistent is a good word, because otherwise I think it would look like, trying to imagine what it would look like with even like the Batman style suits, like just the rubber suits that look really good, but would that look bizarre with everything else around you being this like super flashy CGI? I don't know. I think it made it look consistent. The only thing I really didn't like is his mask. Everything else about it, the suit, I didn't have a problem with at all, but the mask looks bad.
I watched the behind the scenes for this movie, and Ryan Reynolds is basically wearing a neck down motion capture suit the entire time. So every bit of that suit is CGI. Now, I can understand why they made that decision, because the fact that so much of his world is CGI, they can all make it have a uniform look. It might actually look weirder if it was a big rubber suit.
Yeah, that's totally excusable, and it fits in. Like when he's on those scenes on the planet, he doesn't stick out so much, since it's like, yeah, he really doesn't stick out a whole lot compared to like some of the other big characters on there.
Earlier mentioned there have been several Green Lanterns over the years. In fact, in an early draft of this movie, Alan Scott was supposed to be in this. He was actually going to be president of the United States.
That would have been an interesting choice as the president of the United States.
So his part was going to be played by Pierce Brosnan. And throughout the whole movie, you know him as the president. And all his parts that he was going to have were replaced with Amanda Wallace parts to give you an idea of what he was supposed to do. But during a mid-credit scene, he was supposed to talk to Jordan and offer him a place in the organization called Checkmate. And that's when you find out that it's Alan Scott.
I think that's a deep dive for folks
right.
that most people would not have gotten.
There are a lot of deep dive characters in this movie. When I was looking at the fact sheet, the amount of cameos is just enormous. And I chose not to write them all down just because I didn't know any of those people.
Well, like anytime they were on anything that they built was CGI, like, because there's whole scenes where you can see, like, I don't know, dozens of characters all at once. All of them have backstories, which is crazy on its own. And then, yeah, and they did. I was like really rewatching it. It was really amazing how much they tried to build into this movie. Like, really tried to pull in characters from all over the place to just to be in a, hey, this is Green Lantern and this is how it works. And which on its own, super complicated, because it's not like Superman or Batman. People don't know the backstory and they don't know how the powers work. And if you're going with the core and all of that kind of stuff, you got a lot to fill in.
You mentioned earlier that this movie came out after Iron Man. It also came out after Batman Begins. And those are two very different style movies. Batman Begins, a grittier movie. Iron Man, it's quippy, quick wit. And DC was having an issue. They were trying to thread the needle between those two style of movies. They were trying to be funny, but also be grounded with this sort of cosmic movie. And it really comes out, especially when you start looking at who their original writers were going to be. First, Kevin Smith, and then it was also David Goyer who wrote Batman Begins. Now, I want to get your opinion on this. Would this movie have been better if it was funnier or darker?
Honestly, they could have done both. Like, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how that would work, especially if they had like Kevin Smith help write it, because I love Kevin Smith's comics. And if, like, once again, you're gonna have to take that beloved Hal Jordan off the pedestal and do a different Green Lantern. If you do Kyle Rayner, like I said, he got his powers because the Guardians were desperate. They were about to die, and they were just going to hand it to him. And then a whole bunch of bad stuff happens to him all at once. And he's tasked with protecting, he's got to save the world. Not just the world, he's got to save the universe. And he's got to figure out how to use the ring at the same time. And to me, that's a great story. And it lends itself to both, one, being dark, because you've got this everyman who's not a real, like, he doesn't have like built-in morals like Superman or Batman even. He's just a regular guy just trying to figure it out. It also lends itself to comedy because he's a total fish out of water. And you can add it both ways. You can have a really serious, gripping story and use the characters, the individual characters throughout it. But you can't have 500 characters in the movie. You're going to have to really focus in on like a few key characters and tell their stories and do it that way.
I don't think you could have tried to make this movie funnier necessarily. Not that I think it's the funniest movie ever made or anything, but I think you do kind of have to keep a darker story. There are definitely exceptions, clearly. I mean, like Deadpool, but Deadpool's kind of one of a kind. But even looking at the Marvel movies that are a little more jokey, like Iron Man, there's still like actual, serious content in there, but also Iron Man's a different story. It's a lot more grounded of a story. They didn't start the first Iron Man with a battle against Galactus, right? That was a good example. You don't want to start this kind of movie with that much going on and then try to also make it jokey and also have some serious parts. I think they did try to thread the needle and do too much here. I've seen that with kind of a lot of the DC movies. I think Aquaman, I feel, is very similar. Even the Flash kind of all have like these, they try too hard to go for, good quips or like little short things you can show as a preview. But I would rather just see better character development. Green Lantern's a hard movie to imagine filming. I mean, this kind of works and I like it. And there's definitely a lot more powers with what's going on. There's definitely a lot more ability for movies to do this sort of thing and work, but this is the kind of power that if you're not going to do a lot of CG, it's not going to work. So is it going to always look a little bit cartoony like this and out of place with something like the Batman movies that they really did take a very gritty, serious world in that? Are you going to try to mash them together? I don't know.
When David Goyer passed on this movie, he actually went off to go write a Flash movie. And he actually wanted to tap Ryan Reynolds as the Flash. Would Ryan Reynolds have made a good Flash?
I think he would have been a great, like, Wally West, because Wally West was kind of a wisecracking type of guy, but they want Barry Allen, who's a scientist. And Barry Allen, so that wouldn't be who I would want for that type of character. And I'm sure would I watch a Ryan Reynolds Flash movie? Heck yeah. I'm sure that it could be pretty good, but I don't know. I don't know where Ryan Reynolds would best fit in the DCU, quite honestly.
I don't know what else he could do, but I also think here's my overall concern with a DC connected universe. And I think you touched on this earlier, Ryan, which if you don't start it with Superman's death, then a lot of these other characters in the back of your mind, you're like, but Superman could have just stopped this. Like, we didn't need to have this whole movie. He could have just stopped this. That's always been my problem with a lot of the DC stuff outside of Batman, which kind of feels like its own connected world. And also he's not dealing with global threats most of the time. Yes, he does somewhat on and off, but like, the Joker or Penguin or Bane or any of those are much more like direct one-on-one kind of enemies. He's not trying to fight a galactic force, which is what you'd have something like Superman for. But that's anytime there's a DC related movie and the Superman's still around, you're kind of like, but he could have just shown up and stopped this. That would have been it.
Right. And even in the comics, a lot of times when they have like big story arcs and stuff like that, they have to occupy him in some way.
Yeah, he's always got to be off planet or knocked out or have an alien attached to his chest, forcing him to be in a dream world or something. He's always sort of that god in your back pocket, right? So the Green Lantern, obviously, they spent a ton of money on this. So they were actually trying to find out who could be the best Green Lantern. And there were a lot of people they went through before they got to Ryan Reynolds. And I did want to go through some of these guys with you and get your initial thoughts when you hear the names. First one, Nathan Fillion.
Nathan Fillion actually played Green Lantern. He played Hal Jordan in one of the animated movies. And I really liked him. And like a young Nathan Fillion playing in this movie, I think he would have done really well. Though it wouldn't have saved this movie, but I think he would have done a great job.
Next up, Tom Hardy.
I don't think he would have been a great. I mean, again, unless you're going to get rid of some of the Hal Jordan, kind of the jokes that basically the things that make it so that Ryan Reynolds is such a good fit. I don't think Tom Hardy is a good fit for that same kind of character.
My wife actually brought up the idea of like. She liked the idea of Tom Hardy because we actually just got done watching Mad Max Fury Road, and the way that he played this guy who he's like a tough guy, but then he kind of had to learn to be part of a team. In that throughout that movie, she really liked that, and especially since her family's in the military. She felt like that kind of demeanor that Tom Hardy carried himself with would fit with, jock test pilot.
What about Chris Pine?
Chris Pine could have worked in the same way I think Ryan Reynolds would. I don't think he has quite the same level of the jokiness, right? I don't want to say charisma because I think Chris Pine has plenty of charisma, but I think it's a different kind of character. But I think it still would have worked.
I agree. Yeah, I think it would have been a similar vein. But yeah, I agree.
And Justin Timberlake?
No,
they could have had a lot more dance scenes. I would have been down with that.
That would have been good.
Henry Cavill?
Was this after he was already Superman, or is this before?
This was before.
Okay, I was gonna say after. That makes no sense, but okay. I don't know. I thought he was an okay Superman. I don't know much else that he's been in, so I always think of him as Superman.
I think of him as Superman too, and I think of him as like the super stoic Superman. So I can only see him as like he would be like a super stoic Green Lantern too, which I don't think. To me, that would make this movie even harder to watch. Like having like this super stoic character that like is the one character trying to get through this movie.
And last but not least, Jared Leto.
Maybe. Again, I don't think of him as being funny at all, but if you can ignore his turn as the Joker later, he's done some stuff that's not bad. So he could have maybe pulled it off. The way it's kind of probably more of a Ryan Reynolds problem, right? Once you put Ryan Reynolds in a role, everyone's going to think of that role as Ryan Reynolds, unfortunately, because he has one character. He does it well in different varying levels of intenseness, but it's all the same character. There's no other Ryan Reynolds character ever than Ryan Reynolds playing Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Jared Leto can be a chameleon. So like his version of Hal Jordan is going to be probably even different than what any of us would picture even. So it might be interesting.
As I've said earlier, this movie was meant to be the foundation of a new DC expanded universe. It was meant to be the answer to Marvel and what they were accomplishing over there. So this movie would set the tone of all future movies after it within that universe. And they were looking at a couple different options of which way to go with it. We discussed writers earlier, but it also comes down to the director and their vision. And I want to get your take on the first two initial thoughts they had. Zack Snyder, Quentin Tarantino.
Oh man, I want to see Quentin Tarantino's Green Lantern. That's just all character work. No, like don't even need to sacrifice to the plot. Just all character work.
I can't imagine it would honestly have been very good, but it would have been interesting. I would definitely have to see what it would have been.
We've been talking about this movie for some time now, and I want to boil it all down. What did you love about this movie? What could they have done better?
I mean, I think Ryan Reynolds, even though we just talked about all these other people they brought on, I think he ultimately was a good choice for this character. I think it worked. I think he is what saves this movie from being completely unwatchable. Honestly, I think we've kind of talked about it, is that I would have stayed with a more focused first story, maybe still have the influence of Parallax with Hammond, to be Hector, right? Have him do more than he did. Instead of just being this like screaming foil, have him actually have a real plan. There's lots of options. I mean, Iron Man is a kind of a good blueprint to have a realistic, like, oh yeah, he built a thing. He's a scientist. He could have easily built something that would have been this threat that you have to all of a sudden, stop and then, find some ties to Parallax or something that would make it so that you could have those larger stories introduced in a sequel as opposed to trying to cram it all in now. I don't know, but that's what I probably would have done.
Honestly, the cast is still the most amazing part of this movie. It was really a great cast. The guy who played Hector is an amazing actor. There's so many good actors, I can't even keep track of their names. Even the ones at the top, like Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, that's like a small crack. I mean, Hector Hammond's father is what's his face from The Shawshank Redemption. And so there's a ton of great people. I feel like they did a really good job with what they had. And I do like, as far as like trying to stay true to the comics and trying to show like what the rings could potentially do, make like there weren't all scenes with giant fists and baseball bats, and there weren't, I don't remember a whole lot of scenes with like them making spheres around themselves. So I give them props for that. It's just that the thing I didn't like the most was just too much. They're trying to do too much in one movie, and especially in an origin story movie.
I think we're on the same page with this. I believe this movie really aimed way too high. This is an origin story. Spend some time with the character. We need to learn and love who Green Lantern is. I want to see where he was before the powers, where he was after the powers, and he's got a character arc to it. The thing is, this movie out of the gate is we're taking on a cosmic horror that can wipe out the Earth, and this newbie is able to take care of it. Where do you go from there? I think they need to cut back on the story a little bit, focus on who he is, have a smaller threat, maybe it's just Hammond, and then have us fall in love with the Green Lantern. So guys, this movie has gotten a lot of hate over the years. Is that hate warranted?
I don't think it is, but also, I mean, I've gone on the record many times. I like to watch garbage. So this is not garbage. It is a well-made movie as far as the quality of the effects. It does have an actual story you can follow. Whether or not it's great doesn't necessarily matter, but it's still worth seeing. And like I've said, I leave it on in the background. I think it's fun, but I don't think it's good. But it's fun. That counts for something.
You can leave this movie on in the background, which says the level of where it's at. There are other movies you cannot. They are like I have watched some bad movies recently where they will hurt you. Like you'll go to bed going, but why? Why did they do this thing? Like just sitting there, like it'll keep turning in your head and it will bother you. Or there will be effects that are really bad. The sound will be off. The story will make no sense. Or sometimes the special effects will just be so outlandish for no particular reason that it just takes you totally out of the movie. And I wasn't really out of the movie during this. It was just a meh movie the second time around. The first time I was watching it with my heart as a giant Green Lantern fan, it was super disappointed. Second time I'm watching it just to watch a movie, it's meh. It's fine. It's whatever. There's 100 movies like these running on HBO and Showtime every day. So as far as like the worst movie of all time, nowhere near that. And as even worse comic book movies, I'm sure we can find some worse examples.
This is by far not the worst comic book movie we've ever reviewed. I don't really think it deserves all the hate that it gets. It's bad. I think it's kind of reverse of the nostalgia glasses. People remember hating it, so that hate only grows stronger. The issue is, I think you guys touched on it, it's really a second screen movie. What I mean by that is that I can have it on and I'd be looking at my phone at the same time and not miss a beat. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It kind of speaks volumes about it.
It's eye candy, right? It's got some neat effects and it's fun to like see what they're going to do. But yeah, the story itself, you could take it or leave it.
Yeah, you could skip half this movie and still follow it. There's no big twists or turns or surprises at the end. Now, I mentioned before, this movie was going to be a trilogy. It was actually greenlit as a trilogy before it even got to the theaters. And obviously that never happened. My question is, should they remake this movie?
They need to make another Green Lantern movie, whichever one they choose, because for some reason, I feel like DC got really, they feel like they took the wrong lesson from this movie. Instead of taking the lesson, hey, we tried to do too much, we were too ambitious, did too much too fast, and say, let's try it again, but let's do it with let's do a little more low budget Green Lantern movie. But they took it as Green Lantern's toxic. We can't do Green Lantern. And no, and what really bothers me is like, they've proven that they can take something that got horrible reviews and totally turn it on its head. And like they did that with Suicide Squad within like 5 years. Like they took Suicide Squad, which had tons of bad reviews, then made The Suicide Squad, amazing movie, off the charts. So I feel like they could, if they wanted to, make a great Green Lantern movie and really give this character the big screen that he deserves.
I mean, I think they obviously couldn't do it now with the same Green Lantern. You're not going to have Ryan Reynolds come back to do another Green Lantern movie. I think at this point, kind of like what Ryan just said, you would want to have a new Green Lantern. I think Kyle, as you mentioned, would be a great character to focus on if you're going to redo this. You know, this doesn't have to exist in the continuity anymore since there's not really a firm DCEU at this point. So, you know, have that start with, you know, that you find out later on that the, you know, ultimate bad guy is one of the previous Green Lanterns, and then go, you know, work with that story. You don't need to already know that going into it. That's a neat turn to learn a movie in or whatever. Like that's all got a lot of possibility. But they don't need to make a direct sequel to this at all.
Honestly, if they made a sequel to this, the next Green Lantern they made was a sequel to this, I feel like they could do it. They just make it so that Parallax, first scene of the movie, like they act like it's just a part two, and then first scene of the movie, Ryan Reynolds is taken over by Parallax, and then Ryan Reynolds gets to be like just trashes like the character he had built up the whole last movie, and now he's the bad guy for the current movie. I think that would win nerd points all over the place, and people would, especially after Deadpool, people would eat that up left and right.
I thought you were going to go with, it was all a dream.
No, can't do that anymore.
I assume you guys are familiar with the Zack Snyder Justice League cut. So he actually asked Ryan Reynolds to come back and do a Green Lantern cameo at the end of that movie. And that we would officially connect that movie to the DC Expanded Universe. So for me, looking at it, no sequels, just reboot the whole thing, get it over with. James Gunn, I know he's producing something right now or looking at something right now. So that'd be great to see that back on the screen the correct way. Now, guys, when it comes to this movie, should people go out and seek this thing?
I would recommend it. Like I said, it's a not good movie. I like to have it on, and whenever I flip channels and it's on, I'll sit there and watch it for a bit. As a standalone thing to watch, there's many worse things to watch.
There's, and like, if it's on, I would never say, oh no, you can't, you don't watch it. Don't dare. Like, can totally watch it. Check it out. You'll be amazed at how many people are in it. After actively going and seeking this movie out for this episode, I don't think I would recommend that for anyone else. But if it's like just so happens to be on Netflix or whatever streaming service you use or are on something you have, yeah, it might be worth, checking out and see what the, 2010s were like. I
partially agree with you guys on this one. I mean, if it happens to be on, you don't have to turn it off. But I would not recommend seeking this movie, especially the extended edition. It's not worth the extra time. There are far better superhero movies out there. This is one you don't have to go find to seek out. There's no groundbreaking nature to it. So what's your final rating on this, guys? Would you give it a thumbs up? How would you rate it?
I would stand proudly giving this movie a thumbs down, but then on the ring out of my hand, a thumbs up would show up. Because it's not a good movie. But if I had a Green Lantern ring, I would watch it.
I would be wearing my Kyle Rayner ring, doing a very cool zombie thumbs down.
I guess that means we're thumbs down all the way around. Before we head out this evening, Ryan, I want to thank you for joining us today. And where can people find you?
Well, people can find me on my podcast, The Shakedown, which you can go to shakedown.show or youtube.com/@gettheshakedown. Or you can go to waywordpress.com, WAYWORD press.com. And you can check out my newest restorative justice graphic novel is about to come out. So I'm very excited about that. And you can check it out and get a copy for yourself or get some cool t-shirts or merch.
Well, after you find out or wherever you can find Ryan, because that's far more important than where you can find me. I'm always here or at retrovania.net or at subtastics.bandcamp.com.
And for me, I'm always over at Off Panel Creations. I'm always over there building some piece of nerdy furniture. I want to thank everyone for spending some time with us today, and I hope you enjoy the show. If you have any thoughts on the Green Lantern, or you're that secret fan that's out there and let us know we are wrong, send us a note over at movie-smash.com, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. This has been Movie Smash with Chris Roberts, Jeremy Parmentier, and Fergal Amayo. Produced by me, Chris Roberts. Executive produced by Off Panel Creations, LLC. Movie clips provided by the respective studios. You can rate and review the show at Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You might even find your review read on a future episode. Got a question for us? Visit us at movie-smash.com and send us a note. It too can be read on a future episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Movie Smash wherever you listen to your podcasts.